This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody. Well, on Thursday night, I was up in a very Arctic-feeling Blackpool, and I was there to do BBC's Question Time. And what was really interesting wasn't what the panel said. I mean, the truth is, it rarely is. It's what the public have to say, as we know only too well here at LBC. But there were 4 members of that audience during the course of that recording who said they wanted somebody to give this country clear and strong leadership. And that came from Leavers and from Remainers. Just please, Prime Minister, tell us exactly how we're going and how we're going to get there. Now, the day after that, of course, it was Mrs May's speech. Her third major speech on the European Union. It started off, of course, in January last year with Lancaster House. It was followed up with the Florence speech. And now this. And it's interesting, during that speech, she mentioned the word clear 12 times. It is clear. And I'm asking you, do you think Mrs May's speech has made things clearer? You know, are you clear what her Brexit plan is? Well, this morning, she was doing a debrief of that speech with Andrew Marr. Let's listen to her.
Yes, what I was doing in this speech was setting out an ambitious vision of the future economic partnership that we want the UK to have with the European Union once we've left. And it was a vision that was ambitious, but it was also practically based and therefore a credible vision. It goes beyond anything that the European Union has done before in free trade agreements, because it's very broad. So it was covering issues like industrial goods, like cars, but also financial services, energy, transport, law, science, agriculture, fisheries. So it was setting out that ambitious vision, but also speaking to people here in the UK and saying...
Quite bluntly, you were quite blunt.
Well, I was being straight with people. I think it's important to be straight with people. But there's also one of the messages behind the speech, I think, was to say to people, as I think most members of the public feel, that the time for arguing, you know, either side of the referendum has gone. Actually, this was about setting out an ambition for our future, and also saying to the European Union and the 27 and also the European Commission, we've set out what we want, we've set out where we think we can have this ambitious relationship that's good for prosperity on both sides. Let's get on with it.
And now it's crunch time. And in the course of the speech, I thought you buried a couple of the sort of famous sayings that have dogged the Brexit talks. Liam Fox's terribly cheerful assertion this is going to be the easiest negotiation in human history. It's not been like that, has it?
Well, in one sense, we're doing a very simple thing. We're leaving the European Union. In another sense, of course, having been a member of the EU for over 40 years, there's a complexity to the relationship that we've developed. And what I was setting out in the speech today was showing how, in a very practical way, we can move forward on parts of those relationships. So, for example, you know, if somebody's building cars here in the UK, they're probably using parts that have come from parts of the European Union,
go
selling
back and forth the whole time.
And selling. And I was saying we recognise that because we recognise the importance of people's jobs. What I set out today was a way we can continue to trade that ensures we maintain those jobs.
So there you have it. And goodness me, she has got some work to do, you know, because a YouGov poll that was put out the day before the speech showed a 12-point drop in the proportion of people who think the Conservatives' policy on Brexit is clear. So actually, out there in the country, there is a collapse of confidence in terms of knowing exactly where this government wants to take us. And you know, the number of people who now feel optimistic about the way Brexit's going. And bear in mind, we're coming up for the anniversary of the triggering of Article 50. Just 8% of voters feel more optimistic about Brexit than compared to a year ago, with 3 or 4 times that number feeling less optimistic. So no one doubts that she's got a very difficult job. No one doubts she's got a cabinet that is split down the middle. She's got on the backbenches people like Ken Clarke, who I was with on Thursday evening. Always good value, Ken, and you know, fun to be with. But he's making it pretty clear he'll go against the government, whatever they try to do. There's Anna Soubry out there and others. So the parliamentary numbers are tight. It's tough for her. And in this speech, she did set out in terms of how a trade deal could be put together, perhaps more detail than we've seen before. The trouble with putting out technical detail is very few people understand it, including virtually everybody sitting in Parliament itself. For me, the real problem with that speech on Thursday is that she needed to stand up and say, we will not be bullied and talked down to by Barnier or Juncker or any of them. You know, we will not have threats of punishment clauses. We will not let this lie. And I feel she needs to be a lot more assertive with these people because, you know, they are playing for the future survival of the European Union. They're prepared to do anything. And the other thing that really worried me was during the referendum in the last couple of weeks, you know, I was often asked, well, what if economic logic doesn't prevail? You know, they sell us £80 billion worth of goods every year, more than we sell them. But what if economic logic doesn't prevail and they try and put forward a deal that, frankly, is too expensive and unacceptable? And I said no deal is better than a bad deal. And I really believed that, and I really meant that. And it was interesting that that was language that the Prime Minister picked up. And the point is, folks, if you go into any negotiation, whether it's in business or politics or in life, you have to have a big stick with you. And you have to be able to say, look, if this goes wrong, we are walking away. It's the only possible way that the European Commission will take you seriously. And yet in this speech, she said, we will not be buffeted by demands to threaten a walkout. So it sounds to me like no deal is better than a bad deal ceases to be our negotiating position. And I think that puts us in a very much worse place. The country is crying out for clear, decisive leadership. I have no doubt that she is trying sincerely to do her best. I just do not think, frankly, she's up to this job. That's my view. Tell me what you think. Maybe you disagree with that fundamentally. Maybe you think, no, it's crystal clear. We know exactly where we're going with this. And in which case you can call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think it's clear as mud, in which case text to 84850. And maybe you agree with me on this point about a lack of leadership, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. I'm going to go to Morris on Edgware as my first caller of the morning. Good morning, Morris.
Good morning, Nigel. Now, at this moment in time, the things aren't very clear because not everything's been put on the table to the general public in the same way that you, as a pioneer of what became known as Brexit,
yes,
you as a pioneer, you and your immediate followers, did you actually publish exactly, because you are an MEP and therefore know all the rules and regulations that are involved in the EU, did you actually publish a whole long list of all the various things that needed to be done so that we get cleanly out of the EU?
Well, Morris,
did you or didn't you?
Not a full negotiating package, because you can't go into a negotiation revealing all of your hands. But a few key demands, Morris, like taking back our territorial fishing waters. You know, a few key demands like not under any circumstances going on paying into the EU budget, and a really clear demand that we had to get this done and dusted quickly, and that the 2 years, Morris, for Article 50, that had to be the maximum. So what really frustrates me now is not only are we almost halfway through the Article 50 period, but we've now got a Prime Minister, looking for a transition period, or she's rebranded it, an implementation period lasting perhaps another couple of years. So Morris, I would say to you that on the big stuff, on the really big stuff, I would sum this up, that since the referendum, we've seen too much dither and delay.
Yeah, but the thing is this, you keep on, like many other newspapers and everybody else goes on about leadership and leadership and leadership. A leader has to have people who are prepared to follow properly and not... they need support.
Yep. Well, Morris, I tell you what.
So even a dictator needs support, because if everyone turned around and said to the leader, "Oh, push off," where would that leader be?
Morris, when she gave that speech...
So what sort of advice are these people giving?
Well, goodness knows. When she spoke at that Lancaster House speech, Morris, in January last year, I praised her to the rooftops. She talked about global opportunities. She talked about breaking free. She talked about taking control, of our laws, our courts, our parliament. She said all the right things. And ever since then... Morris, what I've seen are mixed messages, particularly in Florence. We're leaving, but actually we want to rejoin a whole host of European Union agencies. Morris, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that she really believes in Brexit.
Well, I think, Nigel, where are all the lawyers involved with all this? Where are all the business people? Where are they involved in all this?
Well, I wish they were involved a lot more, Morris. I wish we had. Morris, frankly, I would have had armies of British businessmen and women going around Europe, speaking directly to companies that they trade with and companies that sell a lot of goods into this country, and urging them to put pressure on their governments and onto the European Commission to get a proper deal. I think...
Let them get off their backside and do it.
Well, they need to have... Morris, they need to have some leadership. And if we had leadership, and if we had a Prime Minister or a Brexit Secretary, it wouldn't matter, calling in business groups and saying, go out, be our ambassadors across Europe, I think we'd be in a much stronger position, Morris, if we'd done that. Instead, the Prime Minister has relied on the civil service. And just look at them. All these people that Liam Fox was given, that David Davis was given, turn out to be fanatical Remainers. So, Morris, I would say too much emphasis on process, normality, the civil service, and too little of the entrepreneurs who will shape the future of our country post-Brexit. Morris, I thank you for your call. And Morris there, frustrated. And I think a lot of people are like Morris. They're frustrated. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It's now 10:15. Is Mrs May's Brexit vision clear? She used the word more than a dozen times in her speech. I'm not so sure that it is. I'm not so sure we're getting quite the leadership that we need. Sean says to me on Facebook, a good deal for Britain will never be on the table as the EU don't want other countries to leave. Well, yeah, I rather agree with that. Anna says, Nigel, why don't you make some clear propositions? Well, I thought I had. But interestingly, in the second hour today, from 11 o'clock, we will talk about European politics. It's the Italian general election today. We'll also talk about what's been happening in Germany over the course of the last few months. A new coalition has been formed. Interestingly, part of that coalition agreement is a commitment from the new government of Germany to introduce a financial transaction tax. And that means on any trade done, within financial markets, a 1% tax would be surcharged. That would literally devastate liquidity in many of the money markets, in many of the commodity markets, and yet the German government and this has been talked about for years, but the German government are about to give this a new lease of life. I wonder what would happen if during the so-called implementation period the Germans managed to get a majority to push on for a financial transaction tax. Is this a threat to the City of London? No, it's an opportunity. Because what it says is that Europe is determined to go ahead with this piece of legislation. And once we're outside of all of this, we will have a great competitive advantage. And I've had enough of this ludicrous argument that says that all rules and all laws should be the same between European countries. No, they shouldn't. Over 80% of the UK economy are transactions that take place within this country and have nothing to do with trade with Europe or the rest of the world. And yet, as members of a single market, all 80% of our domestic economy is bound by European laws. And it's time we had a bit more vision and we broke free of it and tried to maximise the possibilities that Brexit gives us. Annabelle is calling from Twickenham. Good morning, Annabelle.
Oh, hello, Nigel.
So, did Mrs May set out her stall in such a way that you feel that you know exactly where we're going?
No, I didn't. I thought that she was weak, and I think that she should have said that she was prepared to walk, because then that would have given a clear signal to the European Union that she meant business. Only she doesn't, unfortunately, and it seems obvious. She's a technocrat. She's not a prime minister. As somebody said on one of the BBC programmes yesterday, they said that she was a middle manager. She wasn't a leader.
I think
the whole country knows of that, and that was a foreign correspondent that said that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit cruel, Annabelle, to say these things about the Prime Minister, but I have to say I do rather agree with you.
Well, this wasn't what I said. That was what a Chinese person said.
I think there is a very technocratic approach to it. It's perfectly clear that the civil service have a very, very strong hand in this.
Not only that, but I've said it before on many an occasion. You know whose fault it really is, and I think that he's got too much of it, and that is Gavin Barwell. And if you're listening, Mr. Barwell, keep out of it and stop influencing her.
Well, whether it's Gavin Barwell, Annabelle, or whether it's, Sir Humphrey, and there are lots of Sir Humphreys, and they all seem to be fanatically pro-EU. Annabelle, I think you're right. Before, she did say no deal is better than a bad deal. I'm thinking, great, that shows we're at the table. Don't mess with us, Mr. Barnier or any of you. And then what she said in this speech on Friday, Annabelle, was we will not be buffeted by demands to threaten a walkout. So we're not walking away, whatever the circumstances, and that, I think, sends a message to the European Union that we're soft. When the French have battles with the European Commission, they threaten to veto everything, to disrupt everything, and they generally get their way. And it seems to me that we're playing by Queensberry rules with a group of people who don't even know what that means. Annabelle, I thank you very much. Lenny says on text, I believe she was clearly negative. Well, she was not trying to be negative. I'm pleased Theresa May has reaffirmed her intention to the EU and the UK that we're leaving the single market and the customs union. Now we can concentrate on trade and the Irish border, says David. Well, one thing she did do, David, she did say we are not looking for passporting within the area of financial services. We'll be looking for a degree of equivalence. So that was at least, I think, a little bit clearer in that sector. And she did in many ways, through the technical issues of trade, put down on the table some practical ideas and some counters to Mr. Barnier. And that was a good thing, but it was very, very technical. But if you're not prepared to play really tough with these guys, I don't think you're going to get much out of it. We've got a caller from Jersey in the Channel Islands. Anthony, first-time caller to the show. Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Farage. It's a real honour to speak to a fellow patriot. I'd like to, if you give me a few moments, I voted in the 1975 referendum.
Yeah.
And can I just take you through to before and after the referendum? Now in January the 22nd, 1972, Prime Minister Heath signed up the United Kingdom into the common market without the consent of the British people.
Yes, he did.
He did. Calling it the common market was the biggest deception since the Nazis were led to believe the invasion of Europe, D-Day, 6th of June 1944, would be Pas de Calais.
That was a very good deception, though, Anthony, wasn't it? So sometimes deceptions
of Normandy.
Sometimes deceptions can be useful, can't they?
Yeah. Now then, the misleading term common market was nothing more than a front for one country called Europe. Now, prior to the referendum, May 13th, 1975, inflation was 21%. May 16th, 1975, the pound sank on the foreign exchange to lose 25.2% of its 1971 value.
Anthony, listen, we were going through terrible economic turmoil back in the 1970s, and in some ways, perhaps that's why we did vote by 2-1 to stay part of the common market, because it was sold as economic salvation. But I agree with you. It was the most gigantic lie that has been told in peacetime to the British people. It was an absolute disgrace, and all three parties were willfully part of it. But if we fast forward, 45 years to where we are now, do you believe that Mrs May is the right woman to lead us through Brexit? And did you get from her message the clarity that she sought to give you?
Well, as I say, if it comes to fruition, then yeah. But at the moment, I'm very doubtful because of the lies that were told in 1975 regarding. Because apparently Harold Wilson, he got some concession, but never materialised.
Well, even he admitted that the concessions were limited. And when David Cameron,
he didn't get it. But,
no, and David Cameron tried the same trick on us, and we weren't going to be suckered twice. So where's it going to end, Anthony, in your view?
Pardon? Well, if going from past experience of politics, and I've been a Conservative, but it's the Conservatives that really sold us out in the past, and I can't see why that the common market was a good thing. Why we couldn't have just have a common market, trade with Europe, but as Winston Churchill did say, be in Europe, but not of Europe.
Yeah. Well,
that's what we have to have all these directives, and for them to tell us what we can do and what we can't do. And incidentally...
Well, that's why we voted Brexit, Anthony.
The fishing industry has lost 100,000 jobs.
Yeah, I know. Anthony, you haven't got to convince me, and we've done fishing on this programme many times. Anthony, I thank you for your passion. I'm going to go to Neil in Canterbury, a first-time caller to the show. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I am fine. I don't think we're getting the clarity we deserve, though.
Right, so I'd like to widen the conversation. So I just want to make the point that you and I will never agree on Brexit, okay? I'm an invertebrate Remainer. I think you've played your hand brilliantly in the last 10 years. I think your position is despicable. So let's just put
despicable? That's a very strong word, isn't it? Neil, all I want is for us to be a self-governing nation. How is that despicable?
I don't think we'll end up in that position.
How is that despicable, Neil?
I think you and your colleagues in all parties have led us into a position where no Prime Minister could put out clarity, because I don't think clarity can ever be achieved.
Neil, listen, I can tell the passion from your side of the argument, but why is what I've done despicable?
Because I think you, not you personally alone, but you and your Brexiteer leadership during the referendum told bald-faced lies that were swallowed wholesale by members of the public. And I can just say that in a straw poll of 10 of my friends who voted to exit, all of them would now vote differently, because the reality of what they voted for is beginning to hit us. And they don't believe that self-government and self-actualisation in the way you describe is ever realised.
So we're condemned to being run by unelected bureaucrats in perpetuity, are we?
But I don't actually agree that is the position. That's what I'm saying.
Well, they make our laws.
We have never really been impacted in a way that is wholly negative for the economy, for the well-being of this nation, by European law. There is no evidence of that. There is plenty of evidence about economic impact. There is plenty of evidence about workforce impact. And there is plenty of evidence about being alone in the world, that we are a small nation and we must live as that. So you and I are just never going to agree on that analysis. No. I accept that. All
right, well, let me ask you, Neil. We can disagree, and I'm despicable, apparently, for reasons I haven't quite yet.
Sorry, no, I said your position is despicable.
Right.
You as an individual, I specifically said.
I tell you what.
Really well.
No, fine. Well, if we've reached a state, Neil, where the desire to be a self-governing nation is despicable. I don't call the European Union's original ideas despicable, but I do think where they've crushed nation-state democracy now is. Neil, I thank you. Call again, because you're a very sporting caller. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It is now 10:31. Mrs May keeps using the word clear. She's making it clear as to what her Brexit position is, and yet the country doesn't seem to be getting it. Mind you, she's had a tough week, hasn't she? Just look at it. Sir John Major Tony Blair, former Prime Ministers, lining up to try and derail Brexit and indeed, in many ways, to derail her. So it's not being made easy for her. But does the wider British public, are they crying out as Lord Adonis demands for a second referendum? Well, more of that in a moment. But back to my basic question, are you clear what Mrs May's plan for Brexit is? Mark is calling from Huntingdon. He's a first-time caller to the show. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Nigel. And unlike Neil, I'm actually a fan of yours, a huge fan.
So you don't think I'm too despicable, then?
No, you're okay.
So, Mark, and if you're a supporter of mine, you will have supported the call for the referendum. We got the referendum. We won the referendum. But here we are. Nearly halfway through the Article 50 process, and I know it's not easy for the Prime Minister, but is she giving us the leadership and clarity that we need and deserve?
I'll do a last answer to that first. That's basically, I don't think it's going to make any difference who the leader is.
Right.
Because basically, if Parliament get the final say, that's a bit like holding a second referendum and only letting London and Scotland vote.
Well, I do understand what you mean, because the political class on this are pretty distant, aren't they, from the Brexit view in Huntingdon?
Yeah. Well, I mean, before Brexit, I always used to vote Conservative.
Mm.
And my local MP, Jonathan Deongley, I'll never vote for him again.
Because?
Because he's with Anne Filbury.
Yep.
I just couldn't do it. The referendum, it was all about what the people wanted. Not what big business wanted, not what the politicians wanted, it's what we wanted.
Not what John Major wanted, not what Tony Blair wanted.
No, it's what we wanted.
Yep.
Right? I mean, in Mrs May's speech, she said we're going to leave the single market.
Mm-hmm.
She said we'll leave the customs union.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to control our borders.
Mm-hmm.
Legal system, it's all coming back to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big ones on me.
And that all sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That all sounds good unless we leave the single market but finish up so closely tied in terms of regulation and everything else that we've only left it in name.
Yeah, well, that's no good. I mean, I can understand, it's like, with their Henry Hoovers. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but they change the thing, you can't have as much power. Well, what's stopping us making Henry Hoovers for the European market and Henry Hoovers for our market if we want more power?
Well, actually, whatever we manufacture, we have to conform with the standards in that country. So if we manufacture goods and sell them to America, we have to conform to their standards, and the same with Europe. But, my big argument, Mark, is 80% of the UK economy, most of those businesses in Huntingdon are not involved with import-export whatsoever. 80% of our economy is domestic, and Brexit is a chance to actually help the 5.2 million men and women out there that are running small businesses or acting as sole traders. And if we don't change any of the rules and regulations, we won't have helped them. So, Mark, you're pessimistic. You think ultimately Parliament's going to vote this deal down, do you?
Oh, yeah. There's no question about it.
And and what would that mean? I mean, would that mean...
It means it won't be out. It means that the politicians will do what they want and not listen to what the people...
Mark, if they try and stop Brexit from happening, don't underestimate the anger that you will see in this country.
So I'm worried that there might be a civil war if they do something like that.
Well, I wouldn't put it as far as that, but there is certainly great anger out there. I guess, Mark, what would happen if Parliament did this to us is they would try and force us to vote again. And I do not want that to happen, but that is the worst-case scenario with this.
Well, that's what they always keep trying to do. You look what happened to Holland and that. No, we don't like it, we'll do it again.
Well, they did it in Denmark, they did it in Ireland, and with other referendums, they've simply ignored the result. Mark, they can't ignore us. The worst they can do to us is make us do that vote again. And if we have to do it again, we'll beat them, Mark, next time by an even bigger margin. Thank you. And Mark, they're clearly pretty unimpressed, not just with Theresa May, but with our entire political class. The only thing clear about Mrs May's speech is that she's not committed to a full Brexit, no clear vision on immigration or fisheries, and still wanting to keep us tied to some EU agencies. Helen, I agree with you. The problem I have with listening to Mrs May is that as soon as I hear her speak, I want to switch off. I am not clear at all what she is saying, says Andrew in Chelmsford. And Dominic says, I usually disagree with everything @Nigel_Farage says, but on the lack of clarity from the government on Brexit, I hate to say I agree with him. Mrs May says she's clear on Brexit, but she hasn't got a clue. I think Mrs May is treating the negotiation like a poker game, and she'll only reveal her hand at the right time. And she showed enough for now, says Chris. Well, Chris, that's an optimistic estimate of our negotiating stance. I've watched the Foreign Office. I've watched, our civil service in combat with the European Union over the years, in particular during that 6-month period when Tony Blair himself held the rotating presidency of the European Union, when he promised to reform the CAP, to reinvigorate the European economy and to do most extraordinary things. And then I saw a haggard Mr Blair a couple of days before Christmas, at the end of that 6 months, coming into that committee room, clearly having barely slept all night and having been absolutely stuffed by the French. He'd lost game, set and match. He'd given away £7 billion of our rebate in return for nothing. Our track record, Chris, on this sort of thing isn't really very good. Simon is calling from Harwich. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning, sir. I've been a caller before.
Yes, I recognise you.
I'm a trade unionist, as I've said before. I'm a Labour councillor who did vote leave. Basically, I don't think Mrs May has a clue what's going on half the time. Because of the fact... I feel it's
Simon. It sounds a bit like Jacob Rees-Mogg's household, with lots of kids running around in the background.
I have 3 children, but that's part of the reason why I voted out, because I wanted a better future for them.
Yep,
I truly believe that, but I still stand by that. But what I am upset about is the lack of leadership. It feels like, why can't we say, if we've not got a good enough deal, we will walk away?
Absolutely.
Why can't we say that? Are we scared?
Well, she did, worried? But Simon, she did say it last year, and now, and I'm going to quote it again for the avoidance of any doubt. Now on Friday, she says, we will not be buffeted by demands to threaten a walkout. So it means she's going to stay whatever they do to us and however they treat us.
That's not right. You can't do that. I mean, we didn't even accept that in the Labour Party, let alone the Conservative Party. I mean, as you know, I'd be a Eurosceptic as well from the left point of view. But
plenty are, Simon. Plenty are, Simon. I mean, at least 4 million people who voted Labour in that general election last year had voted Brexit the year before. But Simon, not that it's on topic, but given you're a Labour councillor and a trade unionist, I can't resist asking you, how do you feel about the Labour Party completely turning around on its manifesto and now saying they want us to be in a customs union and perhaps a single market?
Well, it's hard. I mean, as you know, I am a Labour person. I won't argue, but my personal view, I think we should come out. If we're paying for a service, it's like we're all in name, and that feels wrong.
Are you going to tell Mr Corbyn, Simon, what you think?
I could tell him. I could send him an email. He's willing to accept emails, but I am just one person, Nigel.
No, I know, but I do think, Simon, I do think a lot of Labour voters have been pretty badly betrayed by Mr Corbyn. At least Theresa May keeps the language that we're going to leave the single market, the customs union, and take back control of things, even if the compromises she's prepared to make to get us there would nullify much of the positive benefit. But the Labour Party, Simon, deserve a roasting over their U-turn. Simon, I thank you for your call, and that's the left-wing centre-left perspective on Brexit, and there's a lot more people like Simon out there than much of our press give credit for. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 10:45. So a big speech from Theresa May, but of course a few days before that, a big speech from Jeremy Corbyn. Quite a big change in the Labour Party's position. I wonder, what do the public make of our party leaders? We've had a couple of calls this morning saying that our faith in a political class is plummeting towards the floor. Well, have a listen to this. Comres polling, very, very interesting. Considering the last week and the speeches they've made on Brexit, has your opinion of the following leaders got better, worse, or stayed the same? Jeremy Corbyn, 18% think better of him. 45% have kept their view the same. 29% think worse of him, and the rest don't knows. Theresa May, 9% say they have a better opinion of her after her speech on Friday. 52% stayed the same, and 27% have a worse opinion of her. So basically, we've got support for what our leaders are saying on Brexit in these speeches. Support for them and the rest of the political class is plummeting. And that perhaps explains why. In that audience in Blackpool, when I was there doing question time on Thursday, there were so many people, Leavers and Remainers, crying out for absolutely decisive leadership. And one thing I would really love to see is just publicly Theresa May saying to Barnier, we will not be bullied by you, you jumped up little bureaucrat. That's what I'd like to hear, but there we go. I doubt I will. Barbara is calling from Chichester. Good morning, Barbara.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. Yes, clear as mud.
Clear as mud. I mean, Barbara, there was lots of detail here about how she saw trade working, but it's kind of the big stuff she's not quite getting, isn't it?
That's right. And I've always considered myself to be fairly intelligent, but I thought, goodness, this is not a speech for ordinary people.
No.
Because it was, I don't know whether it was deliberately done that way or whether that's just the way she is. That's how she speaks. But I think she's a puppet, to be honest, without being too blunt.
Of whom, Barbara? I mean, who is the James Bond film character stroking the white cat, controlling all of this?
I'm not sure. I think there are one or two. Somebody mentioned Gavin Barwell earlier, and I've always felt that myself about why did Gavin Barwell get back in there after the election?
Well, the reason for that, of course, is her previous advisors were sacked, weren't they?
Yes, but why him? I mean, surely she could have got somebody. Anyway, that's another
Yeah,
story.
I mean, she'd even given Lord Adonis a job for the government.
Right.
You know, before he walked away. What she's doing, Barbara? What she's doing, Barbara? She appoints a mixture of Leavers and Remainers, believing by doing this you can keep the whole thing together. Actually,
yes.
I think what she should do.
Not strong enough.
What she should do is sack all the Leavers or sack all the Remainers, and then we'd know where we were, wouldn't we?
Exactly, one or the other. Because to me, certainty, straightforwardness is always better, even if it's not what you like.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the country is crying out for it, including you, Barbara, from Chichester.
With convictions, you've got to have the courage of your convictions. You've got to have those convictions in the first place.
And I don't think she's really got them, do you? No. Thank you, Barbara. Great call. Thank you. I get on Twitter, why are you so scared of voting again? Do we live in an authoritarian state, or is democracy still respected? Thank you, Andrew. Well, interesting, isn't it, that when people were asked, given Corbyn's U-turn, when people were asked in a poll, should Corbyn have committed Labour to a second Brexit referendum, a staggering 12% say yes. So, there is not demand out there for a second referendum amongst the public. At least I don't believe there is. There is from, of course, Tony Blair and John Major and no doubt Goldman Sachs and many others. But most people say, a clear majority say, we have had this vote, let's get on with it. And Mrs May had picked that up, and I suspect her market research had picked that up, hence her saying, let's get on with it. And if you took some of the things she said at face value, you'd think, great. But, we're dealing with bully boys, and if we're not prepared to walk away, they will walk all over us. Sam is a first-time caller from Perth in Western Australia. Good morning.
Good evening to you, Nigel. How are you?
Good evening. I'm very well indeed, thank you. You're obviously following the Brexit debate from the other side of the world. Has she shown, give us a global view, has she shown strong, decisive leadership?
Well, as an Australian and someone who's just watched from afar, firstly, could I just say that the disrespect I've noticed from people, from Tony Blair to whomever else, to dishonour the referendum is nothing short of disgusting. We might as well all pack up and go home if people's democratic vote's not going to be permitted or allowed. But secondly, I've heard people on your show this morning speak and playing down Britain as some small island.
Yeah, we had that, didn't we? Yeah.
And I'd just like to say I'm from a nation with less than half the population of England alone, And we somehow managed to be a first world democratic secular nation with free trade agreements with the likes of Japan and Korea and China. So I find it laughable, people speaking in Britain thinking that the great nation of England or the great region of the UK can't possibly fight on their own. I just find it farcical.
It's a lack of self-confidence, isn't it? It's a lack of belief in the nation's ability to do things. It's sort of a conditioning, Sam, I guess we've had because we've been stuck for so long inside this European project, and we're used to hearing big businesses explaining we must be part of it. They love it, of course, because they can write their own rules. No, I mean, Sam, I do look at those people who are my fellow countrymen almost with disbelief, as you've pointed out beautifully. What is Australia now? About 20 million people, is it?
It's about 25, Nigel.
25, so yeah. And as you say...
You've mentioned many times, I've seen you mention along the journey in EU Parliament, particularly about our immigration system and our value system and how we run things, which has a little bit of pushback, as you can imagine, from a few lunatics on the left in Australia. But the majority of Australians understand that the reason we are a safe first world nation is because we are very stringent on our immigration. And we've seen disasters occur with people on boats, in particular coming from the north, which I notice is well and truly in vogue in the Mediterranean.
Oh, yes.
But just back on Theresa May, I find her cowardice awful that she's not standing up to the likes of the EU.
The bully boys.
I've noticed you've carved through them quite successfully on your journey, like the Australian pace attack would carve through the England.
Oh, don't, not from that awful, terrible time we had at the Wacker. Oh, don't remind us, please, Sam.
Well, it's gone now, so you've got a new chance with a new stadium. But, I would just hope that you would get out there, and not to use another pun, and go into bat for England again, because while you're doing a tremendous job on this show, this needs to be seen through, and for it to be anything less than a proper Brexit, I think is really disappointing, because I know that 17 million or so people voted for that, and that's what should happen.
Yep. Sam, great call. Thank you very much for calling in. And Sam there, a regular listener from Western Australia. My last call on this subject is going to be from Basildon in Essex. David, another first-time caller to this show. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Great last call.
It was a great call, wasn't it? Yeah, he made the point, didn't he? 25 million people, they're a first world nation. What's the problem?
Okay, very quickly, we want to trade with Europe. They need to trade with us. I voted Brexit. How would you negotiate the deal so that there aren't giant lorry parks at Calais and Dover?
Oh, smart technology, David, is the answer to that. But actually, if we had a tariff-free agreement, there'd be no problem at all. We'd carry on as we are. And that's what economic logic says should happen. But Barnier and co don't want to do it because they're worried if we walk away with a simple free trade deal, other countries are going to want to walk too.
Do you think we'll get it?
I don't think we're going to get a proper trade deal out of them. I hope I'm wrong, David. But as I say, unless we're prepared to say we'll walk away from this, we'll never get a good deal.
You just feel that the current politicians couldn't negotiate a discount off of a broken bag of crisps.
Oh, David, on that wonderful comment, we will leave this debate. I thank you very much. Now, today, Italians are heading to the polls to vote in one of the most uncertain elections in years, and one that could determine if Italy gets a populist, Eurosceptic coalition government. Also will report that German Chancellor Angela Merkel is set to form her fourth government after the opposition Social Democrats voted in favour of another grand coalition. Do you sense Euroscepticism is sweeping across Europe? Tell me I'm wrong. And is the idea of coalition politics perhaps the way forward? Call 0345 6060973, text to 84850, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and watch us on Facebook. Comment there too. We're live from London next.